I am privileged to host another of the Converge members here on our little webzine. And today, after we spoke to Jacob a few weeks ago, today we are here with Kurt, the producer slash guitarero slash musical genius, however you want to call him. So thanks for being with us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Thank you for the kind words.
Well, it might be a little fanboyish, but I totally stick to them.
Oh, thanks.
So happy that it was possible to get you here. So where do I catch you right now? I mean, it's 10 a.m., right? So what am I catching you?
I'm at home in a spare bedroom full of boxes. Is this just a podcast, or is there video of this also?
However you want it.
Okay. Well, if people want to look at boxes and mixing console channel strips.
Well, as they also have to look at me, they'd also take the boxes.
Yeah.
So, what is up next? Any recording to do today, or
not today? But I starting. Today's Tuesday, so starting Friday, I have Mutoid Man in the studio. It's their first record with the new bass player Jeff Matz, so that's exciting. We've been trying to record this album for several years now, and they've had a number of things have gotten in the way. They had a lineup change, and they've had obviously COVID put a wrench in the works as well. So it's exciting to get back in the studio. The demos of the new material are really super good, and I'm excited to get into it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, or if my research was wrong, but is it correct that you only started that your interest in music really started in your mid-teens when somebody handed you a Slayer tape?
My interest in metal.
Yeah, in metal. Sorry.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's a spectrum, right? So like, I was certainly aware of like rock music and and increasingly heavy rock music, and increasingly like gnarly punk music over time. It's tough to say like what where like the specific moment was that I started getting interested in music, but or getting interested in like playing rock music, but that was definitely a big part of it. I think hearing Slayer for the first time was like, that was really coming from another place that I had never ever heard before, and that was I can think of a few instances like that in my life where I heard something in my early life where I was just like, whoa, this is different. And hearing Slayer for the first time was like that, and hearing Death for the first time was like that for me. I'm not like a huge Death fan, but I remember like hearing that on college radio and being like, whoa, this is not what I'm used to. And Sonic Youth was another big band like that. I heard the song Tunic, which is on Goo. Excuse me.
No problem.
I heard that on WERS, which is the Emerson College radio station, which that was like sort of the best, or one of the best college rock type of stations around in the 80s and 90s for me growing up. So that made a big impression on me too.
So I mean, like when you say that you only started interest in playing music in your mid-teens or somewhere around that, how did it end up you learning so fast? I mean, like,
well, I mean, I played music before that. Like I was in school band, so I was playing saxophone and other instruments around school band and stuff. So I had musical experience. Like I knew how to play in a group, and I played a little bit of piano as well, and I would like write my own music on piano. It wasn't anything very good, but it was exercising that muscle of like learning how to write outside of the realm of sheet music. So I think a lot of people that come up in playing music in an organized way through school, I think they get a bit tied to just playing the music that's put in front of them to play, and don't ever get over the hump of that into the realm of improvisation and in composition. And a lot of my classmates who played music were kind of in that boat. And to a certain extent, I think even people who pick up guitar sometimes, you know, they never really get to the point where they're writing. They just want to learn how to play other
Mhm.
people's material, and you know, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I pretty early on, I took an interest. I've always had an interest in creating stuff, and I think I took an interest in being creative with music fairly early on, even though I didn't, you know, arrive upon playing guitar until I was like 15 or 16.
So you had musical experience before, and when you started learning the guitar, did you take lessons, or is it all autodidactical?
Uh, I never took lessons with guitar, but you know, I took lessons with saxophone and piano, so I kind of had a little bit of that background. And then when it came to guitar, I just my earliest experiences playing guitar, I was surrounded by people who were significantly better than me at their instruments, and so that was a really good motivator for me, like to try to keep up, because you know, I was pretty good at saxophone, and I was one of like I was like my section leader for a while, so I was accustomed to being like accomplished at my original instrument, and then when I came into playing guitar, and now I'm like much worse than everybody else. Like I didn't like that feeling, and that was a good motivator for me to try to learn fast. And you know, I don't know if I'd be able to find them, but like I used to just go home and make tapes of myself playing guitar for hours. Like I would go into the spare bedroom at home and wait, you know, in between the time that I like finished my homework and was waiting for my parents to get home from work, I would just play guitar. So, you know, an hour, 2, 3 hours a day, that was like the time that I could play guitar through an amp at home where I wouldn't bother anybody. So then I would do that, you know, every single day. And you know, it was mostly just trying to like, and it was also developing my ear at the same time, because I was playing along with records, and that's really what taught me how to play guitar. Is I was playing along with mostly like, you know, the first few Metallica records and the thrash era Suicidal Tendencies records, and like the early Slayer records. That was the stuff I was playing along to. And you know, and then later Boston hardcore stuff, I started kind of like playing along to that, and also other early hardcore stuff, Minor Threat and Black Flag and that sort of thing. And that's really like, you know, how I learned to play. And then, you know, I developed my playing over the years by writing songs. You know, I have never been someone who's sat down to work on technique all that much. It's more been about like writing a song, and then like writing a song that's above my ability level, and then improving my ability in order to be able to play the song.
So you decidedly write, or at a time you decidedly wrote something that you knew was a little harder for you than you could do it?
I don't know how conscious a decision it was at the time. I think young people like act on instinct a lot, and then older people tend to analyze
Yeah, yeah.
a lot more. And I think, you know, analyzing how I behaved musically as like a young person, looking back on that, I think that's what I did. You know, I was like, you know, especially like in the world of metal, like, you know, there were so many of like the easy riffs are taken, that to be original, which was important to me, like one of the ways that I, you know, found to be original was to keep adding layers of complexity to the music I was writing, like, you know, oftentimes to a fault, but I was, by adding that layer of complexity to the music, to me, it felt like it was more original or more unique. And then, but then also adding those levels of complexity, you know, oftentimes added levels of difficulty. And that was a way, I think, one of the ways that I progressed as a player.
So you say that it's hard for you to pinpoint when your real interest in playing guitar started. Is it also hard for you to pinpoint the moment when you realized, I would like to go into producing? Or has there ever been such a pinpoint moment, or is it just an evolutionary step?
I think it's an evolution. Like I don't think of producing and songwriting and being in a band as different things. To me, they're all just part of the creative process. And so when I first became interested in recording, it was mostly that I was frustrated with the experiences that I had had in recording studios, and I wanted to learn more about the process. And I think and I would borrow friends' 4-tracks here and there to be able to hear my ideas. I used to like write Converge songs a lot on my own, where I would like record all the different guitar parts and bass parts and program drums on a drum machine, and create demos of full songs. And it was easier for me to work out ideas like that on my own, where I don't have other people like watching over me, waiting for me. And I think I was not as trusting of my bandmates at the time as I could have been too. So working stuff out on my own definitely helped me craft songs. And I think wanting to get into recording was partially an extension of that, but also partially an extension of like the frustration that I felt with recordings that we had done not coming out the way that I had heard them in my head. And I thought that if I understood the process a little bit better in the studio, that I'd be better equipped to help guide whoever was engineering our records. And so so I started recording, and by the time I could afford to buy my own 4-track, I actually had a decent job and was able to afford an 8-track. So bought an 8-track, half-inch 8-track tape machine, a Tascam TSR8, and a little Fostec mixing console and a few mics, and I was off, and I was making demos for Converge stuff, and eventually started recording the full Converge band doing demos, and then other bands I was in and friends' bands, and then it snowballed, and friends of friends started asking me to record them. I started charging people $10 an hour to record their demos, and then 7 inches, and then I want to say maybe the first like serious album project that I got was Caven's Until Your Heart Stops.
Mm-hmm. Although you had already produced some of their stuff before, if I get that right, right?
I helped them out with a remix that they did called Beyond Hypothermia.
Yeah.
And that record was
in the credits.
Yeah, but I'm not the only engineer involved in that. I just sort of that was kind of like a complicated situation where they had recorded a bunch of stuff with Brian McTurnan on ADAT, and then they changed singers, and they wanted to release the original material with the new singer, but I think Brian wasn't around anymore, or he didn't have ADATs anymore or something, and they found some ADAT studio, but the engineer there wasn't really like all that well suited to the style of music that they were doing, so they asked me to come in and help kind of guide. But this was like really early on in the process for me, so like I didn't totally know what I was doing yet, and it was also an unfamiliar studio, but I helped out a little bit with that record. And then we did Until Your Heart Stops together. I actually can't remember if that was recorded before or after Converge's When Forever Comes Crashing. I did a lot of the basic engineering on that one, but I didn't do all of the engineering, and I didn't do any of the mixing, at least on the original version of that. I think Until Your Heart Stops might be the first one, the first like sort of notable album that I did all of the engineering and mixing on, like front to back.
Yeah, and was that also like a moment when you noticed that this is something that really appeals to you?
Yeah, well, that year was, and in Boston terms, a year is September to September, because that's when it's such a big college town that all of the leases start in September. And then August 31st.
You're talking to teachers, the same for me. So
yeah, so that year, when I say year, I mean 97 to 98, I think it was. That year was a really big change in my studio situation. So I rented a house in Allston, which is a neighborhood of Boston, with everybody in the band Piebald and a few other friends, and they would practice in the basement. And I had
gangs.
What?
The Hydra Hat gangs.
Yeah.
Piebald and stuff.
Yeah. We were all. I mean, that's when Hydra Head was based in Boston, and we were all hanging out all the time. And I actually recorded ISIS's mosquito control in that basement also. That was the only time I got the cops called on me. in that basement. But yeah, we had a little studio set up in the basement of that house. And when I moved in, I still had that little 8-track and that little tiny mixer, and I was recording every once in a while and still working a day job. And then by the time I left that house a year later, I had a Soundcraft Ghost console, which was like a pretty serious, small, and it was an inexpensive, but still a pretty serious console. And I had a Fostex G24S 1-inch 24-track tape machine, which was like a really great sort of prosumer format tape machine. And that's what Until Your Heart Stops was done on, and that's what Mosquito Control was done on, and When Forever Comes Crashing was done on that, and then the Drop Dead LP that I did was done on that. And I got to the point, by the end of that year at that house, that I was recording constantly. Like if I wasn't working my day job, then I was recording in the basement. But it's also a house that people were living in. And so I basically got kicked out of the house, or my studio got kicked out of the house, because, when the lease was up, my roommates were like, hey, we don't want to live in a recording studio anymore. There's like people here all the time. It's loud all the time. It sucks living here. And I don't blame them. So at that point, and it's actually a really great thing that I moved my studio out when I did, because 3 weeks later, the house caught on fire and my studio would have been ruined. My roommate stayed there, but they only stayed for 3 weeks, and they all had to move out because, the house was, they were able to fix the house eventually, but the studio would have been ruined. So I ended up finding this other commercial space in an old industrial park in a town called Norwood, Massachusetts. And then, my studio grew a lot more in that next space before I moved to Salem. But that 1 year, the 97-98 school year, was when I went from recording as a hobby to recording at the level I didn't yet think it was going to be a career, but I knew that it was something serious and that it was at least self-sustaining at that point.
I always struggle with the word career because it implies so much. And I also sometimes think that if you apply it to yourself, it's like a little strange. Would you call your producing work or production work a career for you?
I would at this point. Yeah. I mean, I think if someone asks me what I am, I'll generally say musician, because I feel like that encompasses all that I do. But I think I have a career in music. And so that involves engineering, producing, mixing, playing in a band, building guitar pedals. Everything I do is music related. And it's that sort of big bucket of different things that form a career. But, I never set out to have a career in music. I was a biomedical engineer and got laid off from my day job, and sort of at that point, the music side of my life was busy enough that I was able to do that without working a day job.
Is it right that you took the money from your severance package and used it on the studio in Norwood? Yeah, well, sort of. Or at least partially, probably.
The severance wasn't like a lump sum, but the severance was a continuation of my salary for 6 months after I left the job. Okay. So that was when my last day on that job was actually the same week that Jane Doe was released. So, and there was just total coincidence that's how it worked out. But Converge got really busy starting then, and part of it was what?
Nobody knows.
Well, part of it was that record was not initially really well received.
No, it wasn't. I remember that. I remember that people were like, "Oh no, that's not the stuff that they did before."
Yeah,
yeah, I know it.
People don't always like when fans change, but that was at that point in time. I didn't have a day job anymore, and I don't think Jake did either, and Nate didn't either. Nate maybe was like working as a courier or something, but he had just moved to Massachusetts. He's from Virginia, so now we finally had everybody in the band like pretty available, and able to tour and living in the same area. So it was, during that time period, there was just a lot of activity from Converge. And I think it wouldn't have been possible had I still been working a day job. So part of it was just like kind of fortuitous that I was laid off, but it sort of forced me into having a career in music in a way.
You said that, I mean, like, it's clear, of course, you started out with the bands from Boston, with the whole Hydra Hat gang and a lot of other bands from around the corner. Of course, there certainly was that moment when people came from overseas, right, from other countries, to require and to use your skills and knowledge.
Yeah.
How did you feel at that moment? Did you think like, okay, now there is something special going on here?
Yeah, I remember I started working with a lot of bands from the West Coast and a few from Europe. I remember I had a band called Beecher come over from the UK, and I've, stayed friends with those people over the years. I had Carry On from California come out, and around that time period, I was no longer had a day job. I was working at my studio in Norwood, and Converge was getting pretty busy. And where the studio was in Norwood was like this industrial park. And I could really only record at night and on the weekends there because the other businesses there were working 9 to 5, and I didn't have the studio super soundproofed. So it wasn't really a place that I could work during the day. And I realized, like, if I'm going to have bands from England coming over here to record with me, like, I can't ask them to just wait around all day and then start recording at 6 p.m., and then record all through the night. It's a lot to ask of someone who's traveling a long way to work with me. So at that point, I realized that it seems like there's something here. People want to come work with me, and that this studio is busy enough that I can justify getting a more dedicated studio space that I can have 24-hour access to. And that's when I started the search for the studio that eventually became what I have now in Salem.
Did it take you long to find that spot?
About a year, and then took about a year to build.
Okay. So when bands nowadays it's probably a usual thing for bands coming from overseas. I remember Quellertak from Norway, they spoke highly of your services, and other bands as well. So when those bands come over to Salem, to the Boston area, do you also help with like accommodation and food and arranging all that?
I do now. So I used to live above my studio, and there's an apartment above the studio. And in 2014, I moved out and bought a house. So I don't live at the studio anymore, but now my apartment's available for bands to stay in. Prior to that, I would help them find like an Airbnb or something, but it's a lot more convenient now that there's a place to stay right above the studio. And there's plenty of stuff to do within walking distance of the studio. Like, there's a bunch of breweries, and there's groceries, and there's movie theater, and, you can walk to everything. And if you need to go to Whole Foods or something, there's a Zip car right in the front of the studio. There's a Zip car parking right there. So it's really super convenient. And especially now with like Uber and Lyft, people don't have trouble getting around. So I don't usually have to do very much. Okay. My engineer, Zach, who works with me at the studio, he lives just up the street. So, if a band's arriving later at night, they can usually just stop by his house and pick up a key to get into the studio. And so it's very convenient, which makes I wish that I had a bigger studio and a little more storage space, but it would be really hard for me to leave the convenience of everything that is around the studio in that town.
Yeah, and probably also like the convenience that you're talking about, and also like the appeal to bands, right? And I mean, like, it's much easier if a producer tells you, okay, when you come here, you can sleep in the apartment above, it costs you a little bit, but still, it makes it a lot easier, of course.
It does, yeah.
So we've spoken a lot about like the history and the logistical side of recording, but let's get to the more like emotional side of it. So have you got like 2 or 3 producers at the tip of your tongue where he's like, okay, those are my favorite producers, or
Hmm.
maybe at the moment or of all time?
Tough to say. I'm not great about playing the favorites game. I mean, things that have been really influential. I mean, of course,
Yeah,
like
that would also be nice. Who influenced your
Thomas
producing?
Thomas Skogsberg. All the work that he did with Swedish death metal stuff was
Yeah.
hugely influential on me. But I'll say this, as a listener of music, it's really hard to quantify what the contributions are of producers. I know a lot of times, like, people will credit me with the sound of a band when it's really more the band that's responsible for the sound of the band, and that they chose me as like a good complement to what they were already doing, and it's not like me that's like dictating the direction of the band. And so I try to keep that in mind as I'm thinking about other people that are involved in music. Like, was like, say someone like Steve Albini, who obviously has been a part of like
you're going to
tons
the
of,
question, but I wanted to ask. Just go
Okay.
ahead. Yeah.
I mean, Steve's great. He's been a part of a lot of really fantastic records, but he'll be the first to tell you that he basically is. I mean, I don't really know if he knows all of his contributions, but he's not really like a heavy-handed producer type of person. He's a
He doesn't even call himself producer, right? He calls himself
right.
an
I mean,
engineer.
he's been known to produce here and there,
Yeah,
but even despite the fact that he doesn't tell you he does, but he he's managed to be a part of a lot of really great records. And is that because of his design, or is that just because the people making those records made the right choice in choosing him as the right complement to what they were doing at the time? There's also stories out there of people recording with Steve who didn't end up with like a great result because they were the type of band that needed like a little bit more hands-on of an approach to production or engineering. So yeah, I mean, I don't really, I wouldn't call Steve a producer, but he's certainly been a part of some of my favorite records, and I love what he does from an engineering perspective, and it's certainly influential on me. And as like a punk hardcore kid who's also a recording engineer, I've got like Uncle Steve Albini on one shoulder, like whispering in my ear, like, no, too much compression, don't use that reverb, record on tape. And then, on my other shoulder, I've got Uncle Ian Mackay whispering in my ear about, punk ethos stuff as well. So, but, I also have to forge my own path and make my own decisions with all of that kind of stuff as well. But yeah, those people have been really influential. And speaking of Ian Mackay, like, Don Zientara and all of the work that he's done with various Discord bands over the years has been really influential. Same with John Loder. His work with Soulside in particular, I thought was great. I wasn't really like an anarcho-punk guy, but I do appreciate the work that he did with that stuff as well. I did get to meet him briefly, actually, shortly before he died. I did a record in the UK with this band called Eden Maine. We did it at Southern Studios, which was that was my first time traveling overseas to record. That was actually like another moment that I sort of thought like, oh, maybe this is a thing. That was actually an interesting experience because as I entered recording, I'm kind of like the last generation of people who had to start on tape. There just wasn't really, like, I could have got ADAT, I guess, but like there wasn't digital audio workstations yet. I mean, they existed, but they existed as editing platforms and not as recording platforms. So as I entered recording, like I had to record on tape. And so when I went over to the UK to record Eden Maine, like when I flew home with a big ass box of tapes. And then I mixed it, in my studio here. And then, I'd make rough mixes and I'd burn a CDR and then FedEx them the CDR for them to listen to, international overnight FedEx in order for them to listen to rough mixes and then get me notes, because we weren't yet at the point where we could I mean, there must have been MP3s at that point, but like, I mean, I didn't even have a way to Like, I don't think I even had a computer in my studio. I don't think I had a way to like make an MP3 and upload it.
Yeah. And the other questions, of course, also like, how long would it have taken you if you created an MP3 and would have sent it?
Well, it was dial-up internet, you know. So, I mean, I'm sure I guess I probably could have found a way to like. I mean, this would have been like 2000, I think. Yeah, I think it was 2000. So there was probably MP3s by then.
Yeah, there were.
Okay.
The only question is that I said, like, sending a song back then through through dial-ups on this side and on the other side.
Yeah.
It was, like,
was there iTunes in 2000?
I know that there was Napster in 2000.
Was there Napster? So there must have been a way. There must have been a way to encode an MP3 in 2000.
Yeah, that was
Winamp or something like that.
I know that for sure because the institute where MP3 was developed was basically like 1.5 kilometers away from my house where I grew up. So
okay.
that is for sure. That was in the mid-90s. That was already
okay.
That was already a goner by then. But
I think I didn't have a computer. I think I had like a standalone real-time CD burner.
Yeah, probably.
So like a CD was CD. Well, there's different like CDRWs and CDRs and.
Yeah, they were like the rewritables and the non-rewritables for all the kids out there.
But it was basically like sort of function similar to like a DAT machine where you roll the CDR in real time while printing a mix, and I would FedEx that over. I don't miss those days at all. It's funny. Very few people. There's like a recent sort of fascination and rebirth of like all things. I mean, there's always some sort of rebirth of all things analog, but I feel like there's a lot of people who've just never experienced analog now that are like, especially synth people that are kind of like ravenous for it. And I think most people who started on tape don't miss it and are not nostalgic about it.
And it's also funny when you hear people raving about cassettes nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a reason why we didn't use them in the 90s, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, it adds a character, but it's not like...
Yeah, but that character is even more fleeting than on a CD.
Yeah.
I still have some of those cassettes in my basement, and I'm like, do I listen to those for memory's value, or just let's put on vinyl? I have a question, because you've been talking about Steve Albini and Don Zantera and Loader. What do you think of a guy like Rick Rubin, who is very often producing records, but also very often there are strange stories about him producing stuff? Because he sees himself more as a mentor and less as a studio guy.
He's an interesting one. He's certainly been connected to a lot of great records over the years, and from what I hear, if he's working on a record that's not coming out good, he'll remove his name from it. And there's so many stories about him. I've also heard he's heard recently that he's a big trumper. But I do listen to his podcast, and it's almost always great. And I think the persona that he puts forth about how he produces comes across in his podcast. It seems like he's a person who, I think he's very selective about what he works on. And I think if there's no potential of it coming out great, it seems like he's probably not going to accept the job. But I think that when he doesn't accept the job, I think he is still someone who's nurturing to the talent that he's not choosing to work with. And I think there's a good lesson to be learned there. Like, it's not uncommon for me to turn down a job. But when I do, I try to do it in a way that is with the artist's best interests at heart. You know, like if I think I'm not the right person for the job, or if I think I can't complete the job to mutual satisfaction on their budget, or if I just don't like them or whatever, like I always try to frame it in a way that like lets them know that I want them to have a great recording experience, and I want them to be proud of the results of the record that they work on, because I know that they're putting a lot of their hard work, you know, blood, sweat, and tears into creating a record. And so I think they deserve to have a great experience. in doing that, even if I'm not the right person for the job. And I think Rick seems like he is the same, has sort of the same attitude. And while he's not really like a technical person or not really an engineer, I think he thinks a lot about creating an environment where creativity can happen, and putting the right people in a room together, or putting the group of people in the right room, or getting people, you know, the right engineer or the right gear in front of them in order for it to happen. And that's more of like, that's a producer. It's like an A&R thing, and it's also kind of an executive producer thing. And I do think a lot about that for certain projects. Like, you know, the last record that I worked on was an Old Man Gloom record, and it is probably their most bizarre record to date. And the way that it started was quite a bit different than their other records. It was mostly just like Aaron and Santos making assorted noises and drones and stuff, and then the rest of us sort of had the task of turning those into songs. And so what I did, I knew it was going to be maybe a little bit challenging getting people motivated to start doing stuff because nobody had any ideas. So what I did was just created an environment in my studio where there was a bunch of stuff set up and ready to go, and then started throwing ideas at them to see if any of those ideas would stick, and, you know, let them develop what they wanted on their own, but still kind of, you know, get it's sometimes it's really, I find that like the hardest things in creating music is getting from like 0 to 10%, and then from like 90% to 100%. Like the 20 to 80, like the big bulk of stuff in the middle, that's usually the easy part. It's like the biggest part of it, but like once you're rolling,
how do you start and how do you end?
Yeah, how do you start and how do you end? So it's just like, what are we going to do? Like, what are we going to start? You know, how are we going to get rolling? How are we going to get this started? Like, are we going to put drum, like this record, the questions were like, are we putting drums on the record? Are we putting guitar on the record? Like,
Pretty,
you know,
stuff.
what are we doing? You know? So, and I think I helped them get to that like 20% kind of area, then had them go, and then they were able to like develop all this great stuff once they got rolling. And you know, the record's still a work in progress, so I'm not at that final 10%, but that like that refining that happens at the end of a process, whether it's a songwriting or engineering or mixing or whatever, that stuff is also tricky to kind of like finalize all the little details and make sure that everything is, you know, the best version of what it should be. That's also the hard part. I feel like I'm not always good at that 0 to 10%, but I'm generally pretty good at that 90 to 100% range. And the 0 to 10% thing, that takes a lot out of me, and I mostly reserve that for Converge stuff. So I'm not usually a heavy-handed producer because I don't really have it in me to be doing that stuff all the time. Like, I'm not the kind of person who can write a song every day, but I'm definitely the kind of person that can, once it's rolling, can add color to it and refine it and then get it finished.
When you're already talking about recording / writing Converge stuff, especially recording, I mean, like, I know that for recording for Converge stuff is basically always done at God City, right?
Yeah, so, we haven't recorded anywhere else for a while.
Yeah, right. So, like, that was not the question. You don't have to give away anything. But the question was, like, do you schedule it around the other bands that are in at the moment? Or do you say, okay, there's this chunk of, let's say, May and June where we don't take anybody, we're doing Converge?
Generally it starts like that, but then I'll take on smaller projects here and there. I try to let the Converge stuff be a little bit open-ended. You know, Jake's not the kind of singer who can come in and like sing a whole album in a day or two. You know, he likes to record a song or two and then take a few days off and then come back and record another song or two. So, you know, in those times away from tracking vocals, like, I'll be working on something else. I try to schedule it actually so that, like, once I get started on guitar, like he and I can kind of toggle between guitar and vocals, so that in the time that he's recovering, I can be working on guitar. But it doesn't always work out that way.
Recovering is a very nice term.
Well, I mean, he's got this like monster voice, and that takes a lot out of him physically. He's also, generally speaking, singing the songs for the first time when we're recording them. I think Jane Doe is the last time we like demoed songs with vocals. I don't think we've really demoed songs with vocals since then. So there's so part of that is like, for him, is that time off is writing and refining the stuff that he's been working on. And part of it is just like letting his voice recover, or letting his head recover. Singing like that gives everybody a headache too, so it's good to have a little recovery time away from it. So once in a while, I'll end up like mixing a record or something like that in that time period. Or if we run over, then run over the allotted time, then I'm back to regular job, and then I have to squeeze the Converge stuff in here and there. Hey, I gotta wrap it up pretty soon.
Yeah, I know.
Another podcast to do.
A few more.
Okay.
Has there ever been a band that really impressed you when they came into the studio?
Oh,
and I'm not talking about like appearance, but the way that they had their stuff together or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, all the time. It's just fascinating to watch how other bands work and to learn how they communicate. And some bands come in totally unprepared. Some bands come in with like an elaborate system of spreadsheets and flow charts and really specific plans about what has to get recorded when and how, and every process is different. And this, I don't know if there's any like real particular bands that I'd want to talk about, but it's interesting to see how everybody works a little bit differently. And it's also just interesting to see how like some bands are true democracies and other bands are not. Some bands are oligarchies and some bands are anarchy. It's interesting to see the different structures of all the various bands.
You've already hinted at the God City gear that you're doing, like the pedals and the guitars. Is the legend true that you built some pedals on tour and sold them the next night?
Yeah, or day of. Yeah, when I first got into pedal building, I was doing it on tour before I opened my web store. I was building stuff on tour, and I build like anywhere from 1 to 5 pedals a day, and would just sell them at the merch table that day. And that was like I'm not great about being on tour. I need to be busy all the time. I'm not good at hanging out. I don't like the all the downtime that happens on tour. So I really enjoyed I just brought a case full of components and PCBs and my soldering gear and stuff like that, and we just build pedals every single day on tour and sold them at the merch table. It was a good side hustle and fun thing to do to keep me busy. And also I would tend to I'd build a bunch of the same model pedal, but I would build them a little bit differently each time I built them, different to a little bit different spec, so I could kind of learn like what it is about about tweaking like one parameter of a design that would make it sound different, and kind of figured out what I liked by building a lot of pedals that way.
So then you build those pedals also as a learning process for your own music. Okay. Would you describe yourself as a workaholic?
My girlfriend would.
Okay.
I mean, to
then
me,
if she says so, then you probably. My wife would say the same.
Yeah, it's I work a lot. My work is my hobby, so is it really work? I don't know. Yeah. It's tough to say, but I need to have some sort of movement in my life at all times. I'm not good at hanging out.
You're not a couch potato, right?
Well, I mean, I love TV, but like if I'm hanging out, like I'm fully in that. Brain is turned off.
Okay.
And enjoying the show, but I don't like to like half do things. Like I'm not someone who's going to go to a bar and just like shoot the shit. I'm not good at that. I'd rather build a pedal or something or mix a record.
Okay, so our interviews always end up with our quickfire questions. I got 4 for you.
Okay.
Soy milk or rice milk?
Oat milk.
Also a good choice. Kid Kilowatt or Supercharger?
You mean Super Machiner?
Yeah, Super Machine, sorry. Supercharger is, that's that ugly ass Machine Head record. Yeah, Super Machine. Kid Kilowatt or Super Machine?
Kid Kilowatt.
Okay. Roadburn in Holland or Psycho in Las Vegas?
Roadburn.
Good choice. Psycho or Silence of the Lambs?
Oh. Silence of the Lambs.
And last one, pretty interested what you're going to say. In Germany, Cologne or Berlin?
Oh, Berlin, for sure. Sorry.
Wrong answer for me, but anyway, I love the openness. So, Kurt, thanks for being on the show. Hope you also enjoyed it a little bit. And we also, of course, hope to see you back on European stages, or for our American listeners, on the American stages soon. And also excited, whichever record is next coming out of God City.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So,
all right, have a good day. Stay safe.
You too. Bye.
All right, bye-bye.